Hey everybody, this is Dwayne Waite Jr. from Schell Games on the marketing team, and I have a pleasure to talking to one of our subject matter experts, a contributor to help us design and create HistoryMaker VR. It is our virtual reality content creation tool for the classroom. You are able to embody 8 different U.S. historical figures, all in VR, and it took a phase 1 and phase 2 funding from the Department of Education for this project, and other parties to help us really figure out how we can create something built for learners inside and outside of the classroom. And so now we are going to talk with our independent historian here, and I'll let him introduce himself and his expertise.
Great, thank you. My name's Dan Holland. I am an independent historian. I teach college level history here in the Pittsburgh area. And I'm primarily focused on US history. So this project fits in nicely with my level of expertise on the subject.
Cool. So Dan, how did you hear about HistoryMaker VR?
Well, I have a friend of mine who works for Rand Corporation, and he was, I think, brought into the Rand. I think was part of the initial team, development team, and so he told me about this project, and it sounded really interesting. I'm always looking for new ways to expose people to history and to encourage the learning of history through maybe non-traditional means as well. So I immediately took up the challenge, and through a couple of different phone calls and contacts, got in with Schell Games. So I'm thrilled and excited to be part of this project.
Cool. So I mentioned before, it takes a lot of people outside of our development team to create a project like HistoryMaker VR. So how exactly did you contribute to help the team?
Sure. Well, I was asked to review some of the content that's being used for the material, and to make sure that, more than anything, that appropriate resources were being provided. In other words, when a student were to review the material, he or she would be able to use a link to more information that he or she could find out about that particular subject or person in this case, and to make sure that the right questions were being asked and it was put in the proper context, and the appropriate level was used, as well as the appropriate characters, quite frankly. And so I'm happy to see a good diversity of folks. I was also asked to kind of look at some potential blind spots. You know, everyone, of course, now this is both a thrilling time to be a historian, but one that is also creating a deep re-examination of the field, which is very necessary. So I think, we no longer can look at figures in history through the same kind of bland filter as we once did, perhaps. We have to look at it through new eyes, new constituencies, be sensitive to a broad, diverse array of people and backgrounds, and just to make sure that we're conveying an accurate message, but one that also is, I think, relevant to today's moment in time.
Cool. Can you give an example of what type of blind spots that we have to make sure that we address?
Sure. Well, I think, I mean, we have certain different types of conversations at the university level about American history and really what it was built upon. And I think, as we see today, a lot of the discussions coming out really emphasizing, the rise of capitalism, but the rise of capitalism as part and parcel of the rise of slavery in the Americas. So we have that discussion that has to be included, as well as the Native American experience. I think, there's a growing recognition that Native American people have not always been the beneficiary of this quote American dream. In fact, it's kind of the flip side in many cases. They're often the victims of American expansionism and domination. So we have to be sensitive to those types of themes. And at the same time, so there's two things we have to be wary of. One is not to glorify or simplify an experience that may not be quite accurate. For instance, with the Native American experience, some were allied with, for instance, the British cause prior to the Revolution, and even after the Revolution. As well, at the same time, some were not were openly hostile to American expansion and so on. And so I think we have to kind of really dig a little deeper and try and understand that experience. And again, try not to be too complicated here, but certainly with respect to land and ownership, this idea of ownership and land ownership is really a European kind of construct. And so the Native Americans, especially during first contact in the 1600s, this idea of ownership was very foreign in every sense of the word to Native Americans. I mean, they looked at it more from the perspective of, well, this isn't my land, this is our land, and the wise use of resources, etc. So those kinds of conversations, I think, should frame the historical discussion. And then, and also with slavery too, I think, I've seen some prior textbooks in high school and below that have kind of literally whitewashed slavery as if to say, well, it really wasn't that bad. But at the university, we're really kind of versed very, I think, strongly. I took a whole course on slavery and abolition. And to understand, first of all, this idea of agency, and that is that slaves were people too. They had their own lives and their own way of doing things and so on. But at the same time, I think from the white perspective, one historian has actually called it social death, in that slaves could not vote. They were considered 3/5 of a person, and other kind of opportunities or kind of ways of looking at it too. The black codes, for instance, that were used to really kind of suppress African Americans, especially throughout the United States, because here, even in Pittsburgh, we had slavery up until the late 1700s and into the early 1800s. But I think we have to kind of make sure that, in general, people have an understanding that, as I said, of agency. That we're not trying to be too America. How do I say it? Americentric or U.S. centric. That everything exists within a context. That there were actually Native American nations. There were literally hundreds of them all across the country that had their own way of doing things. In fact, had the very first kind of democratic government was part of the Iroquois Confederacy. So there are different perspectives I think we can bring to the table here that would, and certainly, if nothing else, encourage students to ask good questions about these things and not just accept that what they read or see or hear is quote gospel. That in fact there's debate, and a healthy debate even among the history profession, about how we should be interpreting these types of moments and themes. So so I think there's a number of perspectives. We can't forget about the immigrant experience as well, and there is certainly a north-south divide, not just manifested in the Civil War, but in terms of industrialization, immigration versus a more agrarian style south. So those types of things have to be considered as well. So I'm hoping that my contribution will at least encourage people to ask good questions and really see a broader perspective of these historical themes.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, but you rolled into my next question about how you see this tool being used in the classroom, and it's not. Well, you mentioned making sure students are able to ask the right questions, to look at different perspectives. Do you see any other ways that HistoryMaker VR could be used in a classroom? And it's in the preface we talked earlier that even though HistoryMaker VR is built for the middle school audience, I think that we can entertain how this could be scaled up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, I used to run a nonprofit called the Young Preservationists Association, and our sole mission was to get young people involved in history and historic preservation, because often we lose them, and or they just don't seem interested. And I don't know if it's the way it's being taught, or the questions that are asked or not being asked, or what have you. But I think introducing new tools like VR is a brilliant opportunity to engage people of all levels that really appreciate and can dig into history. I think, for instance, YouTube has been great, although I'm there are some inaccuracies and there's certain filters that are applied, but that may not be 100% accurate. But at the same time, aside from simply sitting down and reading a book, which I know many kids are loath to do these days, maybe this will encourage them to at least, again, ask a good question, like, well, who was this person? Or, for instance, Harriet Tubman. How can we really dig into her life beyond just what we see on the screen, in terms of the film that just came out, but also how can we kind of bring it to life and encourage people to do some research, some kind of cursory research, but that's based on good, strong historical background, and then create. So that gives them an opportunity to create their own narrative around history that that kind of puts them in the shoes of this particular character, and then they can ask those types of questions and say, well, what play out some roles and other types of things like that. So those I think are again, it's a great opportunity to really engage people and really draw them into this field.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I mean, I know, for me, just learning, whenever the team decided on the 8 historical characters, I think I learned more about Harriet Tubman and Tecumseh with the materials they created than I learned in school, which is just absolutely crazy. But it's a great tool for students in the classroom or even out of the classroom, just trying to figure out who these people were in part of the U.S. experience. So it's very cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about how students can embody these characters by just being immersed in that VR environment. How do you think that virtual reality? Well, do you think virtual reality will change education first, and then how do you think if it would change, how do you think it would change?
Well, let me answer that by kind of explaining a story. My father was a classically trained artist, painting and drawing and using traditional materials, paints, charcoal, what have you. And in the early 80s, someone introduced him to the computer and said, well, you can actually draw pictures using a computer. And he was very transfixed. This is long before Apple Paint came out. So he basically wrote his own program using Pascal of all the languages. So it was quite a long bit of code that he had written. But he created what was called Panda, Painting and Drawing Access. And to him, it was just another tool. It was like, okay, here's yet another medium to create art. And so I see this as yet another way to engage people in in history. And if it leads to them reading more or digging into a subject more through other means, even art, music, that type of thing, then I'm all for it. I think the more ways we can expose people to history and make it fun, I think that's the key right there to really um, turning that light bulb on. And let me also say this, that I think it's really important for the history profession and the technology field as just a kind of as a blanket field, to kind of blend, because too often we're in the history profession, we're only all about books. And if you can get people more interested in the visual medium, like mapping, or computer mapping, or this VR concept, or even producing films and documentaries. I have some colleagues of mine who've been very successful with that. Then absolutely, again, the more ways to involve people in history, and I guess selfishly, I think about the preservation of history, just from my own interests. Then I think that's a win right there.
Good stuff. So, just got two more questions for you. So, what's one thing that you hope people would learn from using HistoryMaker VR?
Yeah, I think, just as I said before, I think just being able to ask good questions. All too often we see things or read things that we sort of take at face value. And I think we really need to question some of these things and say, is it really what it is? Or how can I learn more about this subject? This is as you can imagine, this is a presidential election year. There's a lot of things being said on both sides, or all sides, I should say. And I think people really need to know the truth and seek out the truth for themselves, and not to accept what they've heard from somebody as being, that truth. So I think those types of, that kind of critical eye needs to really come, and independent thinking more than anything, so that people aren't, as I said, just accepting this. Well, and even the stuff that I've written, or that I contributed to this project, I want people more than anything to say, well, okay, I'm going to dig deeper. Not that, hey, Dan Holland said this and therefore it is. No, I think there's other ways of looking at things, and I think people need to be cognizant of those types of things. And there's also lots of other resources. We're learning every day more and more about historical characters that we didn't know. And as I said before, I think now is a good time to be asking these questions, because there's a lot of conversation about, our history, what it means, and how did it come to be? How did we get to where we are today? So those are, I think, the kind of key perspectives I think that this VR project brings.
Very cool. So, I'd like to just end with this last question. So, if there was a student or a educator that was, on the fence about using, VR, or using a HistoryMaker VR in their classroom, what is at least one reason why they should give it a shot?
Excitement. I think it generates a certain level of excitement that I think any educator would love to see in his or her classroom. I think all too often, and again, maybe I don't know all that much about every single level, whether it's high school or middle school, but it seems to me that all too often teachers are teaching to a test, or teaching through some formula. And I don't think that you can teach effectively that way. Not only that, but it kills the subject. And what better way to generate excitement and some buzz in the classroom than to have, kids, especially today, they're all about technology. They walk through the streets with holding a smartphone, and, TikTok and FaceTime and Facebook and all these other Snapface and whatever else,
Yeah.
social media. So look, instead of shying away from technology, let's bring technology into the classroom in a structured and smart way, so that you can again, build this excitement, build this energy, and really get kids motivated beyond, really beyond the classroom, I would say. Have them bring in information, whether it starts with their own family history or history of their community or their city or what have you. That's, I think, the real test. So I would encourage everybody to at least give it a shot, take a look at it, figure out a way to incorporate this into your curriculum, because gosh, it's even if it's just one small segment, I think, I guarantee you kids will probably be really, you know, pretty motivated around this type of stuff.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to talk with me about HistoryMaker VR. And again, thank you so much for your contribution to the project and helping us roll it out to educators in classrooms everywhere. So thank you again.
Oh no, thank you, and please keep me posted on how this is going, and ways I can use it as well, and just keep me posted. I'm thrilled to be a part and honored too.